Of all 7 of the original Mercury astronauts, the most famous had to be John Glenn. The very model of the American hero, the public took to him from almost the moment he opened his mouth in front of a camera. He had a natural way of speaking, an understanding of this new role he was all too eager to portray, and an innate charisma that fit the title of astronaut like a custom-made glove. From the very beginning, he was named by the press and the public as the most likely candidate to be the first man in space. Though things did not quite happen that way. First off, America would not get the distinction of the first man in space when Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin returned to Earth after one complete orbit. Also, there were other qualifications beyond fame that would determine America's first astronaut. But it was clear that Glenn's flight would be something special, and history has an interesting way of making such things happen. Initially, Glenn was scheduled as backup for the first 2 Mercury flights, to be flown by Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom. Upon completion, it was determined that a 3rd suborbital flight would be required, with Glenn as its pilot. But that would all change when Russia would drop a 2nd bombshell as German Titov orbited the Earth 17 times, spending just over a full day in space. As NASA's claim was another suborbital flight later that year, it appeared to many that America was lagging behind in spaceflight. America had to do something big, and soon. To this end, the upcoming mission of Mercury Redstone 5 was scrubbed, and would instead press the larger Atlas rocket into service for a risky orbital mission. Unfortunately, the Atlas had proved troublesome, as many test launches have exploded, including the publicly televised Mercury Atlas 1 failure. In the months before Shepard's flight, several more Atlas launches were attempted, with varying degrees of success and failure, and NASA was still hesitant to put a man on top. As the original scheduled launch date for Mercury Redstone 5 passed in August of 1961, the Atlas was still not ready. Every month that passes adds uneasiness for NASA, as well as Glenn. He knows the longer America waits, the more likely the Soviets would leap even further ahead, and NASA would not even know about it until it was figuratively shoved in their faces. In November, 4 months after Grissom's flight, a Mercury astronaut once again finds himself second to a monkey, as a chimpanzee named Enos is strapped into a Mercury capsule for a 5th Atlas test. While the launch would proceed well, the spacecraft itself began to drift from its normal attitude. While the automatic stabilization and control system corrected this deviation, the roll drift would occur again, followed by another correction. This figurative dance of drift and correction would occur 9 times before retrofire, after which the spacecraft landed safely in the ocean and Enos was recovered alive. Despite the continued difficulties, as if out of desperation, NASA finally deemed the Mercury Atlas safe for human travel. It would take a month of delays and scrub launches, but on February 20, 1962, it finally seemed like all systems were go for Mercury Atlas 6. Astronaut John Glenn was strapped into his Mercury spacecraft, which he named Friendship 7, and the final countdown began. After the final count of 10 seconds, 2 small thrusters on the side of the rocket begin to shoot steady streams.
Good Lord, ride all the way. Godspeed, John Glenn.
And engines ignite. The silver cone and cylinder capped by the black bell-shaped spacecraft begin to rise. 3 large engines in a line bellowing heavy exhaust as the rocket clears a tower and gains speed. This first minute of flight is a time of great anxiety, as this is the moment when the rocket encounters the greatest atmospheric stress, known as the high Q point, and that most of its failures occur. Finally, as the rocket pushes through, vibrations cease and the ride becomes much smoother for the astronaut pilot. The bright blue sky starts to grow darker and darker, as now 2 minutes into flight, 2 of the rocket engines cut off and explosive bolts fire. The lower section of the rocket, called the skirt, begins to fall away, taking the 2 outer engines with it. The central sustainer engine, which poked through the middle of the now separated skirt, continues to burn and push Friendship 7 further. Another 3 minutes, and the final engine cuts off, and the tiny one-man craft separating from the launch vehicle.
Rico!
Plaza crates fired, okay. Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous. Roger, capsule turning around, and I could see the booster during turnaround just a couple of hundred yards behind me. It was beautiful.
Roger, 7. You have a go. At least 7 orbits.
Roger, understand go for at least 7 orbits. This is Friendship 7. Can see clear back a big cloud pattern way back across toward the Cape. Beautiful sight.
Though even with a go for at least 7 orbits, constant checks and decisions must be made on each orbit for safety. 7 was indeed hopeful, but the Mercury spacecraft must first prove it can handle 1. While still in contact with Florida, Glenn gives quick reports on status and situation.
All batteries 25 or above on main, going through orbit checklist. And we're all set. This is very comfortable at 0G. I have nothing but very fine feeling. It just feels very normal and very good.
Communication satellites and the global network we so easily take for granted today simply did not exist at the time. This therefore required a vast network of ground tracking stations spread across many countries around the globe, and on ships stationed in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Despite this thorough preparation, communication was sketchy at best. And the little contact that was established, he would provide updates as much as possible.
Hello, Bermuda. Receive you loud and clear. How me? Hello, Bermuda, Friend 7. How me? Hello, Canary, Friendship 7, over. Canary, Friendship 7, Roger, control check complete, capsule in ASCS and holding. This is Friendship 7, everything is still go, capsule is in fine shape, holding pressure at 5.8, over.
Even so, there were times when no contact was made at all, and all he could do is continue to transmit and ensure his craft remained in operational condition.
This is Friendship 7, this is Friendship 7, broadcasting in the blind to the Mercury network. A 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5. This is Mercury, Friendship 7, out.
Slipping into the darkness of night, he would begin to pass over Australia, making contact with Gordo Cooper and the tracking station in Mouchet.
Hello, Mouchet Comtech, this is Friendship 7, reading you loud and clear. How me?
Roger, Friendship 7, Mouchet Capcom. How me, over?
Roger, how you doing, Gordo? We're doing real fine up here. Everything is going very well, over.
John, you sound good.
Roger, control fuel is 90100, oxygen is 75100, amps are 22. All systems are still go, having no problems at all. Control system operating fine, over.
Any symptoms of vertigo or nausea at all, over?
Negative, no symptoms whatsoever. I feel fine, over.
So,
That was sure a short day.
I say again, Friendship 7?
That was about the shortest day I've ever run into.
Time passes rapidly, huh?
Yes, sir.
After just over half an hour of darkness, Glenn starts to make his way into daylight, after a night that was even shorter than the shortest day he had just commented on.
This is Friendship 7, so having no trouble at all eating, very good. In the periscope I can see the brilliant blue horizon coming up behind the approaching sunrise, over. Roger, Friendship 7, you're very lucky. You're right, man, this is beautiful.
But as sunrise approached, the sun was not the only source of light, as something else outside the window would start to gain Glenn's interest.
This is Friendship 7. I'll try to describe what I'm in here. I'm in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. I never saw anything like it. They're coming by the capsule, and they look like little stars, a whole shower of them coming by. They swirl around the capsule and go in front of the window, and they're all brilliantly lighted. They probably average maybe 7 or 8 feet apart, but I can see them all down below me also. Can you hear any of Negative. They're very slow. They're not going away from me more than maybe 3 or 4 miles per hour. They're going at the same speed I am, approximately. They're only very slightly under my speed. Over. They do have a different motion though from me, because they swirl around the capsule and then depart back the way that I am looking. There are literally thousands of them. This has been going on since about 1+15, over. Just after I remarked about the sunset, I looked back up and looked out the window, and all the little swirl of particles was going by, over.
Roger, how big are these particles?
Very small. I would indicate they're of the order of a 1/16 of an inch or smaller. They drift by the window, and I can see them against the dark sky. Just at sunrise, there were literally thousands of them. It looked like just a myriad of stars, over.
Roger, are they moving by you or floating with you, over?
Some of them float almost with me. Most of them appear to be moving at about 3 to 5 miles an hour away from me. I'm going just a little faster than they are, over.
Roger.
One cannot truly appreciate today just how many unknowns there were. Nobody knew whether or not there were in fact tiny life forms living in orbit altitudes, though it was far more likely, despite Glenn's insistence, that whatever these particles were, they were indeed coming from his spacecraft, especially considering the velocity at which he was traveling. While this presented an instance of intrigue and wonder, the mood quickly shifted to mission control about 15 minutes later.
Roger, you do have a valid impact bag signal up at this time.
A valid what?
A strange signal would appear from a sensor designated Segment 51. This sensor provided data on the landing system and indicated that the spacecraft's heat shield and landing bag were no longer in the locked position. If this indicator was correct, the heat shield may have come loose, or even worse, may have detached completely. If this were the case, the only things holding the heat shield onto the spacecraft were the straps for the retro rocket package, which would be jettisoned immediately after retrofire. As Glenn passed within range of the TUYI tracking station, they would not inform him of this directly, but instead make an apparently routine request to ensure that the landing bag deploy was not accidentally triggered from his end.
That is affirmative. We have message from MCC for you to keep your landing bag switch in off position. Landing bag switch in off position, over. Roger, this is Friendship 7.
Upon completing another orbit and returning into the darkness of night, Cooper would repeat the request, but also add an inquiry of a more cryptic nature.
Will you confirm that your landing bag switch is in the off position, over? That is affirmative. Landing bag switch is in the center off position. Alright, you haven't had any banging noises or any of this type at higher rates? Negative.
By now this would certainly raise concerns for Glenn, as there was certainly something he was not being informed of. But as ground did not have all the information, there was little they could have done anyway. Finally, after passing back into daylight, the situation was made more clear.
Friendship 7, this is Anton. We also have no indication that your landing bag might be deployed, over. Roger, did someone report landing bag could be down, over? Negative, we had a request to monitor this and to ask you if you heard any flapping when you had high capsule rate. Negative. This was, over. Well, I think they probably thought these particles I saw might have come from that. But there are thousands of these things, and they go out for, looks like miles in each direction from me, and they move by here very slowly. I saw them at the same spot on the first orbit, over. Roger.
This, of course, raised more questions than it answered. On the third orbit, a decision had to be made. Flight Director Chris Kraft, since first receiving the strange signal, had ordered his team to examine possible contingency plans, at the same time examining the possibility that it was an instrumentation problem. Either way, the longer Glenn stayed in orbit, the more complicated the situation would become. Before passing into darkness, Friendship 7 was ordered to begin retrofire procedures, despite not completing the planned 7 orbits.
That is correct. At this time, change your retro setting manually, 2043238.
Roger, retrograde time is reset to 04 plus 32 plus 38, over.
As many tracking stations did not read the same signal that Cape was reading, Kraft continues to suspect the signal may be false. To this end, Hawaii was instructed to have Glenn troubleshoot this before retrofire.
Spaceship 7, we have been reading an indication on the ground on segment 51, which is landing back deploy. We suspect this is an erroneous signal. However, Kate would like you to check this by putting the landing back switch in auto position and seeing if you get a light. Do you concur with this, over?
Okay, if that's what they recommend, we'll go ahead and try it. Are you ready for it now?
Yes, when you're ready.
Roger. Negative. In automatic position, I do not get a light, and I'm back in the off position now, over.
Roger, that's fine. In this case, we'll go ahead and the re-entry sequence will be normal.
Roger, re-entry sequence will be normal.
The light did not appear, and even though the flight control team was split, Kraft had agreed with the determination that Segment 51 was giving a false indicator and chose to ignore it. Despite this conclusion, NASA management gets involved, overriding Kraft's decision, instead ordering the flight control team to proceed with a makeshift solution to hold the potentially loose heat shield in place. As Glenn passes over California, he is given the final go for retro sequence start.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, lock.
Roger, retro sequence is green.
You have a green. You look good on attitude.
Retro attitude is green.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
Roger, retros are firing.
Yeah, baby.
Are they ever? It feels like I'm going back toward Hawaii.
John, leave your retro back on through your pass over Texas. Do you read?
Roger.
Glenn is ordered to delay retro jettison until over Texas, which doesn't sound too strange. It is possible they just wanted to monitor the separation. Though once over Texas, it became clear that the situation was far more serious than that.
Texas Jetcom Correction 7. We are recommending that you leave the retro package on to the entire re-entry. Do you read? This is Friendship 7. What is the reason for this? Do you have any reason, over? Not at this time. This is the judgment of Cape Flight. Roger. Say again your instructions, please, over. We are recommending that the retro package not, I say again, not be jettisoned. This means that you will have to override the 05G switch, which is expected to occur at 044353. This is approximately 4.5 minutes from now. This also means that you will have to retract the scope manually. Do you understand? Roger, understand. I will have to make a manual 05G entry when it occurs and bring the scope in manually. Is that affirmed? That is affirmative. Friendship 7. Roger.
It would only take a minute before Glenn passed from Texas to Florida, in which the brunt of the situation was revealed to him.
Friendship 7 is okay, brother.
Go ahead, Cape Friend 7.
I recommend you go to attitude and retract the scope manually at this time.
Roger, retracting scope manually.
While you're doing that, we're not sure whether or not your landing bag is deployed. We feel it's now safer to re-enter with the retro package on. We see no difficulty at this time in that type of re-entry, over.
Roger, understand.
No difficulty with that type of re-entry. Flight Director Kraft did know that there were tremendous difficulties and risks with this off-the-wall procedure. While the theory was sound, the retro package burning up on re-entry could potentially damage a perfectly good heat shield, putting Glenn at even further risk. Kraft makes one final plea to NASA management, but is once again overridden. Finally, Glenn begins to breach into the atmosphere. He overrides the OG switch as instructed, as the friction of re-entry begins to heat the spacecraft. Glenn focuses on keeping the craft steady and in the proper orientation, in which he starts to hear small things brushing against the capsule. It doesn't take too much imagination to realize that this was pieces of the retro pack breaking off. A bright haze covers the window as he streaks like a meteor through the sky.
This is Friendship 7, a real fireball outside.
Then suddenly, a heavy thud.
This is Friendship 7, I think the pack just let go.
And finally, radio blackout. This blackout was met calmly, as this period had already been predicted, when the buildup of ionized plasma around the spacecraft prevents audio communication. Yet during this period of approximately 3 minutes, Mercury Control would not know if Glenn had survived. Tracking continued to follow the spacecraft as it began to oscillate back and forth by about 10 degrees in both directions. Though the craft would periodically stabilize, this oscillation would continue as flight controllers anxiously watched the altitude drop.
7, this is Cape. Transmitting blind.
Keep talking out.
Friendship 7, this is Cape. Do you read? 7, this is Cape. Do you read? Over.
As tracking displayed the spacecraft's position at 28,000 feet, the drogue parachute deploys, followed by voice contact with Glenn. He had survived.
Freespace, Roger, read. Over.
Loud and clear, how many?
Roger, reading loud and clear. How you doing?
Oh, pretty good.
Roger, your impact point is within 1 mile of the uprange destroyer.
Roger.
7, this is Cape. What's your general condition? You feeling pretty well?
My condition is good, but that was a real fireball, boy. I had great chunks of that retro pack breaking off all the way through.
Very good. It did break off. Is that correct?
Roger, altimeter off the pack indicating 80,000.
Roger, reading you loud and clear.
Roger.
A few more anxious moments tick by, waiting for the parachute to deploy and slow the craft's suicidal descent. As the deploy altitude finally hits,
Green chute is on green. Chute is out in reef condition at 10,800 feet and beautiful chute. Chute looks good. On O2 emergency and the chute looks very good. Hello, Mercury Recovery. This is Friendship 7, theorists. Mercury, Friendship 7, this is Steelhead, loud and clear, over. Roger, Steelhead. Friendship 7, the chute looks very good, over. Roger, understand, the chute very good. Descent normal, is that Charlie, over? Roger, that's affirmative. Descent is normal, indicating 40 feet per second. My condition is good. It's a little hot in here, however, over.
everything works perfectly. The descent speed drops. Glenn was reminded to manually trigger the landing bag, and after toggling the switch, the green light came on, and a clunk could be heard. The heat shield dropped from below the spacecraft, and the landing bag deployed properly, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it.
You have landing bag on green, over. That's affirmative. Landing bag is on green.
With successful recovery of Friendship 7, NASA would begin an in-depth analysis of the spacecraft and determine exactly what happened. As Kraft suspected, the heat shield was never loose. The false indicator given by segment 51 was a faulty sensor switch. This signaled a turning point for NASA beyond the completion of their first orbital mission. Chris Kraft would emphasize that overriding his decision could have cost Glenn his life, when he was never in any real danger beyond the normal challenges of his flight. With the spacecraft moving 7 miles per second, 100 miles above the surface of the Earth, there was no time for committee and in-depth discussion regarding important decisions. Kraft would therefore make a change in NASA policy, which would continue for the entirety of the organization. From now on, one man would have the final say in all decisions during spaceflight: the flight director. It becomes the job description of the flight director to assume total responsibility for the lives of the crew and success of the mission. While a mission is in flight, the authority of the flight director becomes absolute, and even the President of the United States cannot reverse a decision made in real time. As for the strange particles Glenn encountered on his orbit, it would be later missions that would discover it was a mixture of frozen condensation that accumulated outside the craft and wastewater, what Alan Shepard would call the constellation Urine. After the flight, Glenn would become one of the biggest celebrities America had ever seen. His flight and its success had moved the hearts of a nation and set the stage for everything that would come. One man's incredible journey that made him a hero and a legend for a generation. A journey that would forever mark this week in space history.